my overwhelming sense for all the ones from the community is probably sadness and fear. And I think one of the parts of that is I also see in the people, my own family. I have a 13-year-old son and a 13-year-old daughter. They're twins, and I'm terrified of what the world can look like for them when they're out of my protection, they're out of my, they're becoming young adults, they'll go and do their own things, but actually, and you want to keep them safe. And sometimes when I look at those videos, I'm not sure how I can keep them safe, how I can ensure they're not seen as a threat by not just police officers, but actually other members of the public. It's one of those videos spoke as the police have been called because someone had called them and they've turned up. It's they view the threat. It's not necessarily a policing response. Sometimes it's a societal response to often young black men wearing hoods. My son wears hoods up all the time. He's as harmless as a fly. But if you don't know, you wouldn't see that. But the second issue was then how she felt herself when the police raided her house. And again, the challenge I see, I could create a world of really nice people who do nothing but say hello and nice things to people and wave at them, and everybody feels great. But none of that would keep those people safe. So the challenge for policing is how do you get that balance between how do you ensure what we do our job properly to keep people safe? Because if we don't do our job properly, then it doesn't matter that somebody hasn't been nice to you, rude, abusive, whatever. Actually, if you've been stabbed or you've been attacked, that we have to be able to deal with that. And the video where the two were started to talk about the stabbing, so the male was saying, there's reasons why he's ended up stabbing, and we absolutely know people's life, what they're brought into, all of that has an impact and builds up to those moments of truth, I would call them, when someone decides to carry a knife, not carry a knife, use a knife, not use a knife. My job is how do I stop that? But I'm not sure I do it if I deny the importance of the role of policing. If we shy away from our ability to have to do what we think is the right thing to do, as Michael Harvin and others say, sometimes the way we do that, the way some of that was horrendous. The smoke, the smirks, and all of that. It's it's never going to be acceptable. But we are probably going to raid houses. We are going to arrest people, and sometimes the houses we raid, there won't be anything in there because the information was wrong or the information was out of date. But does that mean we don't do it? I think we do, but it's how we do it, right, and the way. But we can't not police. I think is the bit I'm trying to get to.
I guess the question is, and the question that I am posing is, you said you cannot police, but what does policing look like? Because is policing not also when you get it wrong, going back to the house and saying, actually, we did get this wrong. We shouldn't have raided your house because our intel was, yes, it was XYZ, and I think that's the bit that's missing because they did all that stuff to our house. All the neighbors and everyone on the streets don't think that they're innocent.
Yeah.
There's like 5 a.m. in the morning, there was 5 police cars outside, your house was being raided. Whatever you tell us, we don't believe it because we think you're criminals. And that's the bit that is the most dangerous bit because you say, yes, you can do policing and you have to do policing and you have to raid people's houses. But the ones you don't get right, because that's the point as well, is there's no accountability that we are ever wrong. From the community's perspective, all these things that they've seen happen to them, like the other kid that said mistaken identity, he spent a night in a cell for something he did not do.
Yeah.
And they didn't go back to his house. They took him from his house during Eid. That's a celebration that's culturally and religiously important. He was taken away from there in handcuffs. And the next day they just sent him back and said, well, you're the wrong person. They ruined his family's celebration. There was a lot of trauma that would have come from that. Again, you're saying as policing, yes, you have to do policing, which is you have to arrest people. But when you don't get it right or you do it the wrong way, there is no
Is there a difference there between, so I see there's a difference between doing it the wrong way, and we should never do it the wrong way, and actually explaining what we're doing, why we're doing it is different. But just because we arrest somebody who's innocent doesn't mean we've got it wrong. Just because we raid a house where we don't find something doesn't mean we've got it wrong. Because if we always knew where stuff was, every house we'd raid would recover something from it. And policing isn't black. It isn't black and white in the sense that there's absolute certainties and it's unknowns, it's uncertainties. That's the world in which we have to operate, where we make a judgment. And sometimes the judgment may not give the outcome we wanted, but I'm not sure that means we were wrong. Based on what we knew, was that the reasonable thing to have done in those circumstances?
I get that on the one hand, if we live in an environment where there isn't biases, racism,
absolutely,
and stereotypes.
Yeah.
Because on paper, then yes, you're just acting based on information, and that's all it is. Whereas when you put race into it and you put particular communities into it, it becomes something that it's not just about.
Absolutely,
you got intel,
I agree.
And that's where it becomes different. Because when you think about policing, it's not just about okay, you got intel, and the intel itself is so objective that you're acting based on the objectivity of the intel. No, once you hear a black male in a household, 6 foot tall. Already, that objective information becomes subjective to the officers who are probably primarily white, who have an agenda, or not agenda, but they have a perception of what that means. So therefore, they go into that house. Maybe if they said it was a household with a family and daughters and blah, 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 4 officers wouldn't turn up there with big guns. But the idea that they perceive that it's a brother that lives in the house, who she said hasn't lived there for 5 years, and he's never been involved in anything that requires criminality. But the idea that it was a black male that they supposedly thought would be in the house, 4 people turned up with big guns. So again, the idea of, yes, you get police act upon information and intel, and whether that intel doesn't yield the desired outcome, I understand that objectively. But we know that the world that we live in is not based upon objective context when we think about policing and the communities that are over-policed. So I think for me, that's where I would push back on that idea that yes, you don't get it wrong, because at the end of the day, when you reflect back on that, the team can look at and say, actually, in this case, we got that one wrong. And that's okay to go up there and say, actually, we got this information, because we didn't come in just blind, right? We had information. So to be able to share that with the family, to say we had information that told us X, Y, Z, on coming to your house, we recognize that that information was not the full picture, or we didn't get it right in that way, and we do apologize. And how can we make amends? So either the way that your community perception, because that's one of the things that she talked about, that people telling their kids not to hang out with her because they've already made the assumption that she and her family are criminal based on something that was still not yielding the outcomes that police thought it was going to yield. So I think to me that's the far-reaching negative impact of that yes, police will get some wrong, some right. Hopefully more right than wrong, but I don't know if that's also true. So at the end of the day, the ones that, especially with communities of black people and people of minoritized groups, when they are gotten wrong, what is the aftercare? Which is one thing that Mike said about what is the bit that you do after to try and repair that relationship, to try and actually show that the police are not this infallible community or organization. Things that for me, hearing what you're saying about policing does have to happen in terms of people have to get arrested. Yes, people have to be raided. But at the same time, it's like what informs that? How much of that is also very clear about how the officers are being trained within teams to recognize that these biases exist. These stereotypes of particular groups, especially black male, is so prevalent within the way the society is. Not just police, but police are part of the society. So therefore, they
so agree. So I pretty much agree with everything you've just said. So decisions based on stereotypes, on bias, are never good decisions. They can never be. And for me to sit here and pretend we don't make decisions based on that is utter nonsense. It's happening. The challenge for me, the question for me is, how do I reduce, minimise, mitigate myself? Because I'm still a police officer, still makes all sorts of decisions every day, my colleagues and others. I don't think we ever get rid of biases, but how do we put in our processes so we're able to challenge and to question and to test before we make a decision?